I'm Mark Z, and you're watching Thorin, the best interviewer behind Travis Gafford.
FlyQuest almost won LCS. That statement in itself should be exciting, should be what's going on. Like, how is this possible? How can we take that for granted? Yes, understandably, the primary storyline to come out of the LCS playoffs was TSM's victory. So unexpected, the way they came back through the lower bracket. They started the playoffs so poorly in the first few series, aside from the Dignitas one, obviously. So listen, that's totally justified. That is the bigger storyline. But for me, after that, people are going to Cloud9's failure and how they declined, or Team Liquid looked like the team that was going to be able to beat TSM, or what happened to some of the other squads. Overlooked for me is this FlyQuest run. They finished third in the standings overall, tied with TSM. Okay, so based on that, yeah, it's not insane they could come second, right? But they did that by ending the split with a 6-game winning streak. Before that, if you go back to the end of week 6, they were tied for 4th with a 50% win rate at 6-6. The idea of all the teams you were going to pick at that point in time, I mean, other people maybe thought maybe like an EG's going to make it at that point in time. Maybe if you were crazy, you had some of the other squads having a chance. People obviously thought some sort of miracle run from some of the other teams, maybe get slightly better was possible. And even then, even if they made the playoffs, everyone expected, of course, Team Liquid, Cloud9, TSM, these are the teams you've really got to look for, right? Then you look in the playoffs, they beat Cloud9 in a best-of-5 series. Team Liquid in a best-of-5 series. They almost beat TSM in a best-of-5 series, a final no less. These are all bigger name orgs with much more prestige, greater legacies. Champion orgs, by the way. These are teams that have superstar players and bigger names than the guys on FlyQuest by and large. For me, I think the problem is, since on paper they came into a number of those series as underdogs, I think what killed it was the EG series they started out with. Because that went 5 games, and EG with Golden Glue looked fairly neutered, even though they were winning games again. They weren't the same dangerous force they were with Jizuke. The idea they went to 5 games made most people think, well, EG isn't good, so FlyQuest can't be that good, and so what can you really expect from them? Then consider where this team came from before this split. So in spring, hey, they were second overall, right? Hey, impressive. But that was taken as almost a universal sign that LCS is weak. It was supposed to be an indictment of the other teams. Basically, Cloud9 were the gods, and then the fact that FlyQuest was second and were beating out the likes of the EGs and the 100 Thieves of the world, the TSMs, was supposed to mean, haha, look at those teams, they must be crap. There was supposed to be no chance that they could win that split. I mean, for a start off, the one team that was going to be in the finals and played them and beat them was Cloud9, who were their kryptonite, who they didn't beat in a single game this year, by the way, until they made the playoffs. This particular split. They even were losing in the regular season. So this is so unexpected. That's the thing with this squad, though. You look at it, it's a team filled with underrated players for right now where they are in their careers. I'll say the only player I don't think is underrated overall is Ignar. Now, I will say that in as much as I personally think he's actually an overrated player. I think he's like treated as though he's like the LCS's Hylissang, but I think Hylissang's actually a much better player and plays in a much more competitive region with way more competition. For me, Ignar's kind of like a playmaking support who is a big fish in a small pond and is not a particularly good pond. So he gets away with a lot and he's not punished in the ways that he would be, even for his picks. Never mind some of the crazy playmaking he goes for. Like, put it this way, from what I've seen of Ignar, Hylissang ever gets sick of playing in Europe or playing for Fnatic. If he wants to get mega paid, put him in the LCS and win the MVP. Like, they just won't punish him. You won't see those ints because people just won't even know that those could be ints and take advantage of them. He'll just dominate the fucking league. So when you consider it in all pro rankings, he was put on the 3rd team. I think that's actually fair. But the thing is, if you talk about him and among fan discussion, I think he gets a little bit overhyped. But let's put that to one side. I mean, basically, I can summarize Ignar like this. The support role is not just about playmaking. So if we put that aside, I don't think he's as good in many of the other areas. Now, let's start with the head of the serpent, as it were. Power of Evil, the star player of the team, the guy who is going to carry your team fights. In my opinion, this is a criminally underrated player. Not just this split, perennially. Like, aside from when he got his hype coming up in Unicorns Love, and the problem was, even though it ended up having a bunch of good players, they were really, really rough around the edges, and their style looked shit. It was one of the worst eye test teams I've ever seen. It looked like everything was just a fluke. So, what I've noticed with Power of Evil is it goes like this. People forget he exists. He's never in these best mid discussions until his team just goes high in the standings, and then that simple circuit that kicks in people's brain of like, well, if the team's high in the standings, then the players must be among the best, except bizarrely FlyQuest Spring. Then all of a sudden, everyone remembers he exists and he's a good player. This is a man who has now been in 5 finals over the LEC and LCS, over 2 different regions, and with 4 totally distinct orgs. I'm not talking about an org that just renamed or something, or you took the same call. Totally 4 different organizations. Oh, and by the way, in those 5 finals, obviously you had to win 5 semi-finals to get there, right? In all of those semi-finals, -1, he was actually an underdog. It was not expected that they would win that match. So this guy, every time people count him out, he just keeps winning. I would give you, if anyone follows MMA, I'd give the analogy of like Kevin Gastelum, a guy that was supposed to just be a journeyman, and he just continued winning. Like every time he would beat these guys that looked like monsters, highly rated, next champion, and then all of a sudden he was at the top of division, and eventually you just had to give the guy his due. Like he had strengths, it just wasn't where you were used to seeing them, or what usually impresses people the most. The funny thing is that he's played with and had some of the success with Ignar, who I think has the flashy style and therefore gets overrated in those respects. People don't appreciate what Power of Evil brings. Like, he's always going to be a good laner. The champions that he plays, he only plays his champion. They're nearly always meta. Like, let me know when you can't play one out of Azir, Orianna, Syndra. When's that not going to be available? And then let's not pretend, by the way, like he's a pure mage player. Like this guy's not going to play a whole bunch of stuff otherwise. Listen, yeah, he's not going to play the crazy shit, but he has some other picks. Cassiopeia is obviously a classic one. There's a whole bunch that he still can play. So for me, in my opinion, the reason he's perennially underrated is his champion pool isn't considered sexy. It's also champions that, a lot of the like basic bitch mid laners play. I won't mention them. You know the names in LCS. I think some of his builds turn people off because even though now it's popular to go the LS route and be like, flame the builds or whatever, like, the funny thing is, people were doing the LS route before in terms of the flame, but they hadn't even thought through the builds. Like, they were just saying, that doesn't add up or make sense. It's like, well, you haven't told me how he was trying to play the champion. Like, if he was going for a certain power spike on the second item instead of the third one, and he wanted to have a certain window at this minute where his jungler doesn't have any... Like, yeah, no. People were talking as though it was in isolation, or using solo queue logic. Like, that beats that. And in League of Legends, if there's one thing I wish people would stop in analytics, I like the general guide of, X beats Y, in theory, if the 2 players are of equal skill. The idea of like X beats Y, and then when you go and look up the stats, it'll be like 55 to 45, and people make it sound like it was a 90 to 10, as though the other side can't win it. You have to be fucking lucky on the other side to possibly win it. That's so whack in terms of like the single factor analysis I see being applied. So let's be real. Even if you don't like his champ pool, like I said, always some of those champions are going to be possible to play in the meta. Well, this was his split, wasn't it? Because 3 of his top 4 champions all time were all in the meta, this split, and powerful. He had his Azir, his Orianna, his Syndra. People forget this guy's a Syndra from when he was over in Europe. So I think, in my opinion, the problem Power of Evil has is his playing style's just not sexy, and he gets the job done, and he's much better than some of the flashier players. So in that sense, bearing in mind Froggen fell off big time this year, for me, he is Froggen 2.0. He's carrying on that lineage, and he's showing that will always be viable. It might not always be the best, but it can win. Put it that way. Santorin, let's just go straight there. Yeah, again, another person where the first big impression you had of him in TSM, he was the one who basically made the meme of the dog junglers, right? So everyone has this impression that he's just a shit tank player who doesn't know what he's doing and just gets bullied by everyone, and then, justifiably cut from TSM. And obviously, you know what TSM fans are like. They'll maintain some of that hate for years and just denigrate you for years the second you're out of the team until you just get in a relationship with the president and come back. Then everyone loves you, apparently. Who am I referring to there? So the problem I have with Santorin is this. It's just how people look at him. Like, I think his name, for some reason, doesn't allow people to ever say out loud, he's the best jungler in the LCS. Because, let's be real, he won't pop off like Blabber will. But I think he was better than Blabber this summer split. Now, forget the playoffs, just in the summer split overall. Like, he did an amazing job. He's part of the reason why they were in 3rd place, tied with wins with a TSM or something like that. I think you also have to add in, look how well he's worked with Power of Evil. I mean, he was working well with Poor Belter, and he got a better version of Poor Belter in Power of Evil. And all of a sudden now, as a 2v2, which 2v2 was better than them in the league? Listen, Niski in the first half of the split with Blabber. After that, if you look at the whole split, I think by the end, you probably have to say Power of Evil and Santorin were the best 2v2, right? Then you go and you look at my boy Solo in the top lane. an ignored player. I don't know how this guy's correct. Like, this guy needs a better agent or something, mate, or someone to work on PR for it, because he's such a better player than the career he's had. Then he comes into this team, and because of the setup of the rest of the team, and the fact that, like, you have Ignar in the bot lane, and then you 2v2s doing so well, he's not going to get to carry. He's not going to be allowed to play those carry champs. And you know what? That didn't matter, because guess what? Until, like, let's say the last weekend, people weren't playing carry tops overall that much in LCS anyway. Like, people were playing through the bot lane. So in that scenario, when he was willing to sacrifice and play the tank top, yeah, looked great. He's another person who I don't think ever got his due fully. So Santorin was second team all jungler at least. Solo didn't even make the list. What a snob that was. Like, I thought that was kind of whack personally. Then we'll go to the last person on the lineup. Now, you'll be remiss if you imagine that I'm just going to say that Wild Turtle's good and underrated. He's only underrated in this context. Most people thought he was completely washed. Nobody thought this guy was coming back and then going to the finals, having a chance to win. Like, to me, he wasn't good in the finals, and he did have his issues once people started to exploit the top lane. But I'll say this. The thing about Wild Turtle that I have a lot of respect for is he's almost like the Ryu of AD carry. Like, yes, if you put him against the best and you put him like 3 splits in a row and observe his performance all the time, he's never going to be among the best. He's going to have maybe periods where he looks good for a few weeks, but he'll never be truly bad in my opinion. And he will be able to come back to play. He's a veteran in that sense, that you can always somewhat rely upon what you're going to get from him in terms of, like, if you give him another chance when your other guy that you put in fails, he's probably going to do something for you, just as Ryu has. That guy lasted like 4 or 5 years after people called him washed already. So listen, yes, failing in the finals, they still went to game 5. I'm going to say in terms of the nature of the series, like, realistically, TSM could have 3-0'd that, could have 3-1 that. Like, that's why in my opinion it was failure, because you looked at what they had coming into that series, you thought they had a very good chance to win, potentially. I thought it was more of like a coin flip. TSM let them get into many of those games, though. But all the same, they continued to spoil the party. If they were given those opportunities, they came and took advantage of them in a way that actually sometimes Team Liquid, for example, didn't. But I do think over the series, there was some chalk there. I think some people just weren't that comfortable in a finals environment, in contrast to some of the people who won a bazillion splits on TSM. I think they fell apart, quite frankly, in the draft and in the game generally. Now, listen, let's be real. So did Cloud9, so did Team Liquid, so did TSM if we go to different points of this playoffs. So it's not like anyone had a flawless playoffs or not anyone kept this like high international level. Like FlyQuest actually, if you ignore the fact that like the most important match to win was the final, they had arguably the best performance of the entire playoffs of any team. TSM won most of their series in best of 5s, my dudes. So overall, I think it was a fantastic split. I think this is a squad that is very well GM'd. I mean, look how many underrated players you picked up there and then made a team that's a potential championship squad. For next season, like, I don't think they're going to do anything at Worlds. Maybe they can do like some best of 1 upsets, but I don't think they're getting out of groups probably, and they're definitely not doing anything in the bracket stage. So in my opinion, you should be considering a roster move. The obvious roster move, because obviously the restriction is your import slots are Ignar and Power of Evil. Now, I personally am not like in love with Ignar, but if you want to keep Ignar and Power of Evil, you should definitely keep Power of Evil. Then in my opinion, the obvious player to get is you've got to get a better NA AD carry. Now with the team they have, you know what? I might go for someone like an Apollo type player. Just get a guy who's like a stable AD carry. If the AD carry champs are super OP, he's probably going to be fine since the rest of the team's put together pretty well. But more importantly, if you have him, and if Ignar doesn't have to only be Ignar every single game of every single season, then you could also play through top. Like, Solo's a pretty competent player for an NA top player. I think he's pretty good. So what a fantastic split. And wow, FlyQuest almost won LCS. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Spencer Green, Whattathings, Pranogo, Matt Shakowski, Tobias Bernasconi, JDubs, Alexander Rao, Xinged, the Puyallup Tribe, Jensen Goh, Hades, Andreas Kroknes, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question in one of those video AMAs I do. Do you want teasers? Do you want to see who the next guests are on my shows? Do you want to take part in an in-depth esports discussion with moi? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the Patreon link in the description box below.